This is Omar Nashashibi in Washington, D.C. with a video we can call Congress Strikes Back. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress, quote, the power to lay and collect taxes, duty, imposts, and excises, and to, quote, regulate commerce with foreign nations. This meant that Congress had the constitutional authority to raise revenue through tariffs and duties and to regulate international commerce. However, starting in 1917 and then continuing from 1934 through 1977, Congress repeatedly passed 5 or 6 legislation giving away much of its authority over trade policy, including delegating authority to the president to negotiate tariff rates and trade agreements. Then came former President Trump, who used trade laws passed in 1962 and 1974 to impose tariffs on products from steel and aluminum to thousands of Chinese imports of consumer, retail, and industrial goods. President Biden is picking up on a trend as his predecessor started, avoiding Congress by negotiating a trade partnership or a framework instead of a full trade agreement. Trump did this with Japan, and the Biden administration is increasingly doing so with the EU and others, often on specific goods or supply chains like semiconductors or critical minerals. Biden has the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. There's also one for critical minerals titled Atlantic Declaration, a framework for 21st century U.S.-UK economic partnership. They got both framework and partnership into that one. The Biden administration also established the European Union, the Trade and Technology Council for the two parties to coordinate on policy. On June 1st, the U.S. and Taiwan signed their first agreement under the Initiative on 21st Century Trade, all of this done without a single vote in Congress. The end around, though, around Congress may have finally started to reach its breaking point with lawmakers on Capitol Hill who are anxious to return to playing a larger role in trade. The top Republican and Democrat on the Senate Finance Committee, which oversees trade, accused the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative of not consulting Congress on trade talks, charges the agency denies. Last December, the Finance Committee Chairman, Ron Wyden, a Democrat from Oregon, and the top-ranking Republican member, Mike Crapo of Idaho, told the U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai and Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo that many of these deals had to be submitted to Congress. Both Ambassador Tai and Secretary Raimondo recently replied a few weeks ago that they have the authority to conduct these negotiations and do not, in fact, need to submit them to Congress for review and approval. So the back and forth is likely to continue. In response, the leaders of the Senate Finance and the House Ways and Means Committee, that one also handles trade, on June 9th revealed legislation that they say will allow Congress to review the recently concluded trade deal with Taiwan and set robust rules for future agreements. In announcing the legislation, Senator Crapo said, quote, this legislation proves that Congress can and will lead on trade and that it cannot be bypassed, nor is there any reason to do so. The bipartisan group of trade leaders wants to review and approve the text of the agreements prior to sharing with negotiating partners, including Taiwan, have extra time to review the text and make public that language. The House Ways and Means Committee moved that bill on June 13th by a vote of 42-0. That is a rare and overwhelming bipartisan vote in a committee that has increasingly become polarized over this year. Keenly aware that the Biden administration is in active discussions on establishing a carbon tariff on imported steel and aluminum, Connecticut Democrat Senator Chris Coons and Republican Kevin Cramer of North Dakota have introduced legislation to direct the Biden administration to study the emissions intensity of U.S. and foreign manufacturing certain goods. What we've also seen is another bipartisan bill that was introduced in both the House and the Senate, this one called the Level the Playing Field 2.0 Act, which picks up on the America Competes Act from the last Congress. Lawmakers tried unsuccessfully to include the Competes Act in the CHIPS semiconductor law that President Biden signed in August of last year, but negotiators could not agree on a trade title that was ultimately dropped. The Level the Playing Field 2.0 Act seeks to address country hopping by importers trying to avoid duties on goods. This is a process known as circumvention. It also targets China's Belt and Road Initiative, where Beijing creates a hub zone within another country and then subsidizes manufacturing of those products, which are then shipped to the United States with a lower duty tariff rate or no tariff rate at all. 4 Senate Finance Committee members, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, again, you're seeing the bipartisan trend here, have asked the trade community to respond by July 11th on modernizing U.S. customs laws and improving enforcement efforts. We are hearing that this Congress is likely to put together some type of a China enforcement and U.S. customs modernization bill, possibly by the end of the year. The senators are hoping to release a draft of just the customs section of this bill that would come out in August, we're hearing, and we know the House China Committee has already released several recommendations on policy fronts related to China. We do not expect that Congress is going to pass laws that President Biden would actually sign. that would significantly take back more control over trade policy to the legislative branch. When it comes to customs enforcement, though, we might even see lawmakers give additional powers over to the executive agencies. But you can see the frustration. You can really sense it on Capitol Hill, not only from Republicans, but also from members of the president's own party, the Democrats, that this administration is just not consulting enough with the U.S. Congress. We'll see how much Congress can claw back, but I would expect to see some type of a much more engaged congressional action here on trade in the coming months than we've seen certainly in the past few years since former President Trump came in and used much of those trade laws. That's the latest from here in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. As always, please reach out with any questions or requests for additional information.